back to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much. Today's film of discussion is going to be the film titled Matilda. It was released in 1996, rated PG, and it has a runtime of 1 hour and 42 minutes. This film was directed by DeVito, who also co-produced this film and acted in this film and narrated this film. It seems like he just seemed to have a lot of creative control on this project, and that's really impressive because I really enjoyed this film as a child, and as an adult viewing this film I also enjoyed it, and just seeing how much control he had over this film and how well it turned out really just show how talented he is. And this is actually an adaptation. So it was originally a book. I'll list the author's name in the bio or somewhere, or you can go and sort of look that up because I don't want to pronounce the name wrong. But so originally it was a book, which means they just adapted it into a film. I'm not really sure if it's anything like the book. I've never read the book Matilda. I've only ever seen the film, and I've only ever seen this 1996 version. I'm not sure of how successful this film was when it was first released. I just know that I was born a year later in 1997, and I remember watching this film on VHS as a child growing up. So if that says anything about my age, that's what you got for me. And I would hope that it's a lot like the book, but of course with anything that's adapted, you want to see some differences in terms of just like interpretation creatively. Hopefully the book and the film are, replicas of each other, but maybe the film just does a different job of personifying that in slightly different ways, and nothing that sort of would upset the original fan base of the book. And the main reason why I decided to watch Matilda was because I hadn't seen it in a long time, so that's one reason. The other reason was because I saw a poster, and actually on IMDb, as I'm looking right now, just looking over some context about the film, Matilda's going to be made again, so they're going to do a remake. I don't know when it's going to be released. I don't know if they've actually announced this anywhere, but I remember seeing it on Twitter, but you know how sometimes you think you see something and you don't, but I can see a poster right now on IMDb, so it looks like there's either talks of doing it or they've already, done it and it's just not been marketed yet. So that's really exciting, and I'm really excited to see what they decide to do with the film, with this remake. But ultimately it was originally an adaptation, and I'm talking about the 1996 version. And so an overall summary about Matilda from my perspective is about a young girl who gets adopted by the Wormwoods. Her mother and father are not the best parents, even though they already had a child previously before Matilda. Young boy. Her brother, I don't even really remember what his name is, and I don't really think that it matters in terms of just discussing in summary, but her older brother's relationship with Matilda doesn't seem to be really strong at all. There's this essence of them being siblings and him sort of teasing her and picking on her just like any sibling really would. I mean, some siblings get along very well, I'm sure, if you're like twins or you're just super close in age, but I think for the most part there's always a time where you and your siblings don't get along, whether you're fighting about clothing that someone wore without permission, you're fighting over the last cookie in the cookie jar, I don't know. From having siblings, it's just, I feel like depending on your personalities, of course, you're probably going to get along with one sibling over the other, and depending on the age gap, but at the end of the day, it sort of felt like a sibling relationship, but there were times where you could definitely tell that he was picking on her more than he needed to be, as if it was just for fun, and I think a lot of that is because he saw how his dad treated Matilda. Matilda doesn't fit in with her family. I guess a similar sort of comparison would be the ugly duckling trope, or like that one duckling that just doesn't fit in based off of how they look and how they act. And basically, Matilda is very smart, observant. She loves to read, but her family loves to watch TV and crack jokes. She has really good morals and values in the sense that, Her father is like a used car salesman, but he buys like stolen car parts and he sells cars to people that have not been welded well. He like jacks down the mileage on cars, even though like the mileage is way over the top at this point. He glues on car bumpers. It's just, he's not ethically or morally a good person, and he doesn't care about anything but making money. And Matilda's mom, Mrs. Wormwood, is basically a housewife who gambles. If there is anything else that she does, I don't really remember in the film, but it seems like she stays home. She's very much the type to, worry about what she's wearing, making herself appear a certain way, but she gambles, and that's all that I saw. I think that she expected that Matilda was going to be like this little doll that dress up and like play house with, but she doesn't actually want to take on the responsibilities of being an actual parent and like feeding her kid and, cleaning up their messes. Several times in the film you see Matilda cooking her own breakfast. There's like a whole little I wouldn't say montage, because it's really just like a scene of her in the kitchen, probably at like 4 years old, making these exquisite pancakes for herself. And before that, they show her at an even younger age where she like spells out her name in her baby food, trying to show really early on that she's going to be pretty smart. And her mom is just mad that she made a mess. Obviously she made a mess, she's a baby, but just things like that. We see a sequence of Matilda before. There's a sequence where she is a young girl, carrying this wagon of books. So not only does she enjoy reading books, but she enjoys reading like a ton. And I could totally relate to that on a personal level, so that was always great. And there's a point where they show her as a young girl, and then how she merges into maybe like 6, 7, or 8 years old with that same wagon, with those books being carried, on the sidewalk on the way home from the library. She went out of her way to start learning how to read. It's not like anyone just like dropped her off at the library. Like, she walked over to the library and she discovers this wonderful thing called a library card. Like, you don't have to come here and borrow books and sit here all day and read. You hear her laughter in the background, laughing at the books, sort of makes friends with the librarian. And the librarian tells her about, the library card, and she realizes, I can like check out the books and bring them back. Her dad, of course, gives her crap and like throws her books around. And I think at one point he even rips up the book. And that really, breaks her heart, because she has so much love and respect for books and storytelling in general. And so that's really sad to see them discourage her when she's finally found some sort of an identity and another form of escapism in a home where she doesn't feel wanted or much like her family at all. It's one thing to not feel like you belong with your family, and it's another thing when they make it very clear that they also feel like you don't. And so that's sort of a briefing about Matilda in terms of a summary and like the dynamics and the things that she goes through as a child in her own household. There's a moment where obviously she's at the age where she needs to go to school, and her dad kind of talks about, wow, she doesn't need school, school's dumb, I didn't go to college, blah, blah, blah. And Mr. Wormwood ends up selling a car, one of his really terrible cars, to this principal known as Miss Trunchbull, and she mentions that she like is a principal of the school because like that's her job, and she gets the car, and he assures her that it's a good car, which obviously it is not a good car, so on and so forth. And anyway, that sort of catapults the progression of Matilda going to that school, and thus giving her an outlet to learn, which she's been wanting to do. She gets to be around other kids. It's clearly not the best of schools, but she'll take what she can get at this point. It's not as if she has a lot of control. I'm trying to think of anything else that I missed. I'm really just trying to summarize a lot of the book and the film, and touch on things that really stuck out to me. So if I'm not going in order, it's really just kind of how my brain is thinking right now, and not so much the order of the film. But she ends up going to the school, and basically in her first day, her teacher, Miss Honey, who's like the golden child, sort of golden teacher that everyone has either had at least once or wanted to have, she notices that Matilda's very smart, and right away she tries to get Matilda to be like in a higher grade level. She does like a lot of math in her head without a calculator. So Miss Honey's like, whoa, okay, you probably shouldn't be in here. And of course Miss Trunchbull thinks it's just a way of Miss Honey trying to shove her off on another teacher, which is not the case at all. Miss Honey even tries to go as far as to going to Matilda's home and speaking to her parents, and they just shrug her off and they're just like, no, it's fine, she doesn't need to do that, blah, blah, blah. They're not really listening to her. And so it gets to the point where Miss Honey just kind of gives Matilda separate workbooks because she's at a very advanced level and, you know, becomes sort of not just her teacher, but her mentor and someone that Matilda feels that she can lean on. She makes a few friends. One of her close friends is Lavender with her really cute little glasses and her hair braided back. And they become quick friends. She talks to a few other students there. They sort of bond over the fact that they have a terribly abusive principal. Trunchbull has thrown children out of the window. There's literally a sequence showing her throwing a boy out of the window because he was eating M&Ms in class. Someone please call the cops immediately. CPS, where are you? Child Protective Services, immediately. Like, that's how bad. And then there's another sequence where she gets mad at this little girl because she has pigtails and she mocks her, and she grabs the girl's pigtails and spins her around and throws her, and she just barely makes it over the fence. And I do have a moment where I'm wondering if Matilda might have been the reason why she had such a successful landing when that girl was thrown over the fence by Miss Trunchbull. But you find out pretty quickly that she has powers. So I guess you could call it telekinesis or something in which she is able to control objects and that she can move things and people. So that's really interesting. And so especially in this world where, you know, Matilda has all these sort of bullies and monsters around her, not only is she able to escape by not being at home and being at school, although she has to escape again because she has this terrible principal. So she uses books as a source of, you know, comfort. Also has superpowers that can protect her from these things when, you know, she feels extremely threatened or when she needs to make a point of punishing that person. There's even a moment in the film where, you know, Mr. Wormwood tells Matilda, like, when a person does something bad, you have to punish them. And then the narrator breaks in. By the way, the narrator cuts in quite a bit in the film, telling the story, but not in a sense that it's a part of the diegesis. The characters aren't aware of the narrator's voice. The narrator's voice is just voiceover, and we as the audience understand that their presence is clear and they're giving us more context. And also that is, again, voiced by DeVito. And it's really good, and I'm glad they decided to go with a narrator, although I don't know if that's something that was prominent in the book, and that's why, or they just thought it was important. It works. And so the narrator says, you know, he said when a person is bad, they should be punished, right? Mr. Wormwood says that, the narrator repeats it, but he says the way that Matilda interpreted that was that when, you know, he meant is that when a child is bad, an adult can punish them. But Matilda took it as, and exactly how he said it, when a person is bad, then they can be punished in one way or another. So Matilda has now taken that on and decided, okay, well, Dad, you're not a good person, so I'm going to punish you. And you see her dad is sort of a trigger for her in the sense that when he yells at her and he's just pushing her to the brink, you know, she's slamming doors with her powers, not with her hands. She's blowing up the TV and yells, "It wasn't me." And the dad's like, well, of course it wasn't you, but it was her. And just like these little random things until she learns to have control over them. And there's this little moment where this really cute song comes on, a little poppy, catchy song comes on. And she's like practicing her powers in the living room. And, you know, she's her own little superhero, and that's really cute. And anyway, there's a point in time where she puts peroxide in her dad's like hair oil to punish him, and then his hair is blonde. It's dyed blonde after that. And there's a time where she puts like glue in her dad's hat, and he puts that on, and he obviously can't take it off without a lot of pain. Just things like that where I think She gets back at the people that hurt her in very petty, childlike ways, which makes sense just because she's a child, but they also give Matilda a lot of agency and help her learn from her mistakes. But I think that really comes into play when she starts to develop a good, solid relationship with Miss Honey, who actually takes on the reins of guiding her and developing her as a child in a way that her parents should be doing, but Miss Honey has decided to take on that role, obviously, after she sees the parents and can't get through to them. There's that. So let's backtrack to the pigtail moment where, I think Matilda might have helped that little girl land evenly, but maybe it's just chance. Again, she's still trying to figure out her powers. Miss Trunchbull also has this terrible place called the Chokey. In a sense, it's like a timeout for the kids, but it's much more gruesome than that. The doors have like these nails, really huge, thick nails sticking into the door. It's dark and steamy. It's gross. It's just probably anyone's worst nightmare, not even just a child's worst nightmare. Again, someone needs to call Child Protective Services on this bitch. And kids talk about how they're scared of going to the Chokey, and if they've been to the Chokey, how horrible it is, and so on and so forth. There's a time when Matilda gets thrown in the Chokey for like a little bit before Miss Honey goes and like saves her, So yeah, the one thing about, I think, children's books and middle grade books in general, and just in life, that I noticed about this film is that a lot of Matilda's monsters and bullies aren't even like children, and that isn't to like okay the fact that some bullies are kids, but I feel like when a bully is a kid, it's one thing, and there's a little more leniency on that child. That isn't to say that children can't be super harmful and shouldn't be accountable for what they do, because I do think there's levels to that in terms of bullying, cyberbullying, assault or name calling. There's so many levels to that, but I do think that there is a point to be made that a lot of Matilda's bullies and monsters aren't monsters in her closet or monsters under her bed or strangers. Your parents are like, stay away from strangers, don't take candy from strangers, so on and so forth. But a lot of her bullies are adults, and they're also adults that she's supposed to be able to look up to and admire. Her principal, her father, her mother, like, that's really sad, and I feel like that's very realistic, though. I feel like a lot of the time, a lot of the bullies and monsters that you encounter as a kid are adults. And it isn't just in a form of discipline and punishment in a very, you did this wrong, so blah, blah, blah. But sometimes your worst critics can literally be the adults. They can be so much more scary than like the monsters under your bed, and that's really unfortunate. But I think it's something that should be noted and mentioned, and I just wondered what other people thought about that as well. As we progress in the story a little bit, Matilda, like I said before, she starts to get a hone on her powers, and she doesn't ever tell anyone until a little later, and I think she really just tells Mrs. Honey, or Miss Honey, sorry, she's not married, Miss Honey, and she might tell Lavender at some point. I don't remember her telling Lavender, but she might have told Lavender. I know for sure she tells Miss Honey, though. Honey is actually the niece, I believe, of Miss Trunchbull, and there's this whole thing about how Miss Trunchbull came to take over Miss Honey's father's estate. So pretty much everything that was supposed to go to Miss Honey, like the house, money, riches, whatever, goes to Miss Trunchbull because she raises Miss Honey after Miss Honey's father dies. His death is pretty questionable, though. Again, this story has a little bit of horror, sort of pushes the boundaries of horror a little bit, and that Miss Honey's father dies, and not often in children's stories do you hear about kids actually dying or like people dying in general in stories like that. But I do wonder, and I do feel like it's insinuated that Miss Trunchbull actually is the cause for his death and it wasn't just like a freak accident. And they might have even gotten deeper into that, and it was years since I have seen it and I recently watched it. I might have missed it again. So someone will have to state like if they remember that, but it seems that she definitely went there with the goal of getting that money, probably injured him to the point of death. So I don't know if it was premeditated or later she decided Either way, I think his death probably was caused by Miss Trunchbull, and if it wasn't, she still took on the role of being Miss Honey's aunt with the intention of controlling Miss Honey as well as everything around her. And at the time, Miss Honey would have been a child, but that the dynamics never changed even in their adulthood. Miss Honey still very much acts like a child around Miss Trunchbull. And you can tell there's a huge level and layer of manipulation and abuse in their relationship. And that's more than a little unfortunate, if I do say so myself. I think the main reason why they go back to the house, so when I say they, I'm referring to Matilda and Miss Honey, is so that they can recover some of Miss Honey's old childhood things or memories that remind her of her father. She usually doesn't go to the house to visit Miss Trunchbull. She doesn't like Miss Trunchbull. She just kind of stays out of her way and hopes for the best at school. You know, she also works as a teacher at the school that Miss Trunchbull is principal of, so on and so forth. So they go there twice and they almost get caught both times. It's a mess, but it's really entertaining to watch Miss Trunchbull just walk around all crazy, like, oh man. I will say that even though Miss Trunchbull is a villain, and it's very one-dimensional in the fact that she is a villain from beginning to end, and she doesn't really change at all, and she doesn't really reflect on anything. She just gets scared away by Matilda in the end. I do like that they made her strong in a lot of ways. Like, she did shot put and javelin, seemed to be somewhat accomplished at some point, and she doesn't really take crap from anyone, not even Mr. Wormwood. It's unfortunate that she does that same thing to children because that's abuse and that's not okay, but I do sort of like that she is kind of tough and cool. Like, she would be cool if she wasn't a terrible person and abusive and a bully. Like, if she was just really stern, but then, like, if people pushed her and she was like, okay, you're trying me, that'd be one thing, but she's just terrible. But I feel like she wasn't boring, so it was good to see on screen, and under different circumstances she would be kind of a pretty interesting and cool villain. I like that there's sort of this thing with Matilda's powers where she tries to pretend that, like, the ghost of Miss Honey's father is coming back to haunt Miss Trunchbull to kind of scare her. That sort of dynamic is really cool. And in the end, Matilda scares Trunchbull away. Classroom scene where these kids are lined up in a line because Miss Trunchbull's like, someone was at my house, and she has this ribbon, which is from Matilda. She always wears a ribbon in her hair, and that day she happens to not be wearing a ribbon, or she's wearing a different colored ribbon. Can't recall on that specifically, but either way, so she's like kind of basically questioning the kids in the classroom. It's really pretty because you can kind of see how small the children are in comparison to Miss Trunchbull, and the camera really makes it seem like that. The blinds, you can see the shadow of the blinds over the kids. Then when Miss Trunchbull starts to hone in on Matilda and the kids in general, Matilda gets chalk and she starts writing this message that's supposed to be from Miss Honey's dad, but really it's from her threatening Miss Trunchbull, and she like throws the chalk and like these erasers. Back then they had like chalkboards, actual chalkboards. Haha, it's been so long. And they're like hitting Miss Trunchbull in the hair and in the face, and she's scared out of her mind, but she's still trying to fight back, and she's losing. Matilda spins her on this little globe thing that they have, and she's making the blinds move up and down and up and down. And the kids, it's really eerie because the kids start to recite the words that were being said and like drawn on the chalkboard, and they're still learning, but you know, they don't miss a beat. And it's always eerie, you know, like when kids in scary movies, when they have kids say, you know, the Lord's Prayer, but it's in like a minor chord and there are children singing it. It's kind of creepy, but it's kind of cool. And in the end, Matilda like lifts Lavender up so she doesn't get like hit by Trunchbull in the classroom, and safely puts her back down, so she thinks that she floated. She's kind of like, I didn't know I could do that. Because you can't, Matilda helped you. And at that point she obviously didn't know that. And the kids like throw their lunch boxes at Miss Trunchbull, and that's sort of how that ends in all its glory. Obviously there are so many other scenes and details that I didn't go over, but I'm just giving you sort of the overall points. And there's also another scene I do want to talk about where Miss Trunchbull forces a young boy, to eat a whole thing of cake. And can we just talk about how, before I talked about the chokey and all that other stuff that she did, like throwing a kid out the window and swinging a kid by her pigtails, creating such a toxic relationship with this child with food is so frustrating, and you can see how tense it is on screen and just how abusive Miss Trunchbull is. Not only does she make this kid eat a whole cake because he snuck a piece of cake like in the lunchroom. First of all, like there are so many other things she could have did besides humiliating this child in front of a whole bunch of students, but then also making him like eat a whole cake in front of her to prove what exactly? Like, oh, you want a cake? Well, now I'm going to force you until you want to throw up. That is such an unhealthy relationship to make a kid have to deal with in terms of food. And you know, something that's supposed to nourish your body. And it's not like, okay, like when your parents make you eat the broccoli on your plate because you have to eat broccoli and like other vegetables to have a good balanced meal. She gives him this insane amount of cake that's probably could feed that whole school and makes him eat it in one sitting. It's just so, the level of abuse is just insanely discouraging and upsetting and frustrating, and also just very, I don't know that it's ever been done so well. I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't watching a lot of movies that were released in 1996, but I doubt that they were doing things like this in terms of showing how mentally exhausting abusive people can be. That really pissed me off to watch on screen, but I also felt like it was really telling of just how far Miss Trunchbull would go to prove a point and get her way. And there are no words. So I kind of went over a briefing of this. There are moments where Matilda faces these sort of FBI, or maybe not even FBI, but they just seem like official, like cops who are staking out her house. And it's just these small things where she kind of still helps her parents. Like she warns them and tells them like, hey, you know, those guys outside aren't salesmen, they're cops. They've been watching for like weeks. What are you not understanding? And her parents don't believe her at first and all this stuff. So throughout the film, as much as her parents like absolutely do really nothing for her except for the bare minimum of what they have to do as parents, she literally just still has their back in a lot of ways. And she does try to tell them like, you know, you shouldn't do that, and you know, those are cops, and does try to help them or at least ignore them to a certain extent, even though she has more power than them in a lot of ways, which again just shows how strong and mature Matilda is and her good character. But in the end, Matilda does end up getting adopted by Miss Honey, and it is the only thing probably her parents have ever done for her that was good and for her and not for them. And they're, of course, doing it in this very hurried way where they went to pick her up, but they're on the run from, you know, the feds. And Matilda's just kind of like, I don't want to go with you. I want to be with Miss Honey. And they have this little bit of a moment at the end. But either way, Miss Honey ends up being able to, like, sign the papers and, like, adopt Matilda. And you see this beautiful sequence of Matilda finally being able to be the child that she is and having the adult, you know, parent figure that she always deserved, who's going to, again, flourish with her, guide her, you know, sort of this dream in the end, who also accepts her for all her beauty and all her flaws and knows all her secrets, you know. It's wonderful. And Miss Honey ends up getting, you know, her house back that she was always supposed to have. Just this beautiful way to sort of top off this beautiful story. So yeah, this discussion today was really just to start a conversation. Hopefully you have some good memories about watching Matilda. Maybe there's something that you want to bring up that you like specifically, a scene, a shot, so on and so forth. There are some good shots in this film, by the way. There's one where Matilda, it's actually sad, but it's different. She's crying, but she's crying while she's reading a book, and you see her tear fall onto the pages of the book that she's reading. If that's not sad, I don't know what is, you know. That's pretty daunting of an image, especially for a kid. I go ahead and put down something that you liked about Matilda, or just any other things that you noticed that I might have missed or said incorrectly. I'm going to do my little segment where I do quotes. I might shorten it a little bit, but these are some moments in the film that stood out that I liked. So here's one. Matilda. Why don't you run away? Jenny, also known as Miss Honey. I've often thought about it, but I can't abandon my children, and if I can't teach, I'd have nothing at all. Matilda. You're very brave, Miss Honey. Jenny. Not as brave as you. Matilda. I thought grown-ups weren't afraid of anything. Jenny. Quite the contrary. All grown-ups get scared, just like children. Matilda. I wonder what Miss Trunchbull is afraid of. And there's also a moment with the narrator, voiced by Danny DeVito. No kid likes being yelled at, but Harry's ranting and raving gave Matilda the key to her power. To unlock that power, all she had to do was practice. And then there's another moment between Matilda and her father, Harry Wormwood. Matilda. Daddy, you're a crook. Harry Wormwood. What? Matilda. This is illegal. Harry Wormwood. You make money? Do you have a job? Matilda. No, but don't people need good cars? Can't you sell good cars, Dad? Harry Wormwood. Listen, I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Sometimes Matilda longed for a friend, someone like the kind, courageous people in her books. It occurred to her that, like talking dragons and princesses with hair long enough to climb, such people might exist only in storybooks.